All right, well we'll get started here. So welcome everyone to this live virtual event, Circular Logistics and Platform Strategy Transforming E-commerce Returns. I'm your announcer, Tom Gatos, the CMO of McFadyen Digital. This session is scheduled for a 45-minute runtime plus about 15 minutes of Q&A. We are seeking active participation from the audience for this Q&A, so please enter any questions that you have along the way into the Q&A box. We will do our best to get to as many of those as possible. The recording of this session and the deck will be provided to all registrants after the fact, along with supplemental content from our participants, including a brand new white paper coming from McFadyen Digital on this topic. I'll now turn it over to your host, Peter Evans.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Very excited about our discussion today. My name is Peter Evans. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for McFadyen Digital, and super interested and excited about this topic today. So I'd like to introduce our guests. First, Scot Case, who's the VP of CSR and Sustainability at the National Retail Federation. Welcome, Scot. And then Rich Bulger, who is the author of a fabulous new book called Going Circular, that codifies a lot of his learnings from a long period of professional experience in the recommerce space. So turning to you first, Scot, what draws you? Why do you think this topic is important?
Oh, geez, there's a bazillion and one reasons why it's important, but I think there's a couple of incredibly important trends that are popping in this space right now. So we have consumers that are more and more interested in one, saving money, but two, also worried about the environmental and social impacts of their purchases. So reverse and circular economy kind of ties into that. We've got investors seeing this as the future, pushing retailers and others in that direction. We have fun, exciting new technologies that are making new things possible that weren't possible in this space years ago. And then there's all sorts of regulatory pressures that are kind of at play. But we'll unpack all of that, I know, as this conversation unfolds, Peter.
Perfect. And you, Rich, what excites you about this space, and what draws you here?
Change. Change is an exciting thing, and reverse is at the tail end of forward. We'll talk about that, but what I mean is when companies are going through and developing sales programs, they're doing it to drive revenue, and they're making promises and commitments to get customers comfortable with buying from them. You can return it after X period of time. You can have a warranty on the product. And the typical support for the sale is an afterthought. We'll go to market and then we'll figure it out later on. But there's been such a dramatic change right now, too. One that Scot talked about, a rapid change in technology and buying behavior, where customers during COVID ran to online and omnichannel over retail. That fundamentally changes the returns, and it's creating a big problem for customers and companies that are trying to go through and manage their budget. Like a frog in a boiling water, the temperatures rapidly went up. E-commerce return rates are going up, putting pressure on that require reverse logistics skills to overcome. In addition to that, there's a massive change in the buying power of millennials and Gen Z. The Wall Street Journal just did an article over the weekend that millennials had the largest growth in wealth of any of the other demographics. Their buying preference is dramatically shifting towards used. So when we introduce concepts like customer two, people who want things that have been used at the second time for either environmental desires or economic desires, there's this massive buying pool that is demanding used products, both driving down unwanted returns and driving up desired returns, are foundational in reverse logistics. And during my time at Cisco, during my time at Verizon, my 17 years there, during my time running a secondary market company, being a part of the RLA advisory board, I found that there is virtually no training on this topic. There's only one college, the American Public University, course that was sponsored by the Reverse Logistics Association, that's teaching a course on how to bring in, treat, and manage returns, which is the foundation of circular logistics, the combination of forward and reverse. We'll talk a lot about it, but clearly I'm excited.
So I have a bunch of questions for you guys, but first what I'm going to do is just show a few slides to kind of set context and a couple of concepts. So just very fundamentally, we're going to distinguish between what is called forward logistics. This is the process of acquiring those materials, making the things that are then distributed and sold to customer number one. Reverse logistics is all about reacquiring that item from customer one. That's that asset recovery. And then there's ways of processing it, which includes sometimes cleaning, sometimes grading. If it's a phone, you need to wipe the data so you don't have residual data on it. So there's a bunch of things that go into that operations before it's made available for sale to customer number 2 or 3, or it may, because it's just worn out and it doesn't have any life left, it may go into recycling. So just wanted to distinguish between forward logistics and reverse logistics because we're going to use that terminology. Also, to introduce the scale that we're talking about here. So total retail sales in the US is now above $5 trillion, so very large. But unwanted returns now has grown also quite dramatically. It's now at 743 billion, so a huge number. And what's also important to know is that the return rates are different between brick and mortar and online. Brick and mortar is trending around 8 to 10% now, but online returns are much higher, running at above 17%. So, e-commerce is fantastic. It's created a lot of convenience, but it's also creating this other issue of returns. So just to give you a sense of the size and scale, 743 billion is a hard number to get your head wrapped around. So one way to give you a sense of the size and scale is to measure it against the GDP of countries around the world. And it turns out that 743 billion is larger than the GDPs of 166 countries. And we're talking here sizable countries like Argentina, Belgium, Sweden, Austria, Thailand. So this, I think, hopefully resonates the size and scale of the problem that we're discussing here. This is a slide that Rich developed, so I'm going to let him talk in more detail about it later. But just to highlight the fact that circular is this interesting combination of understanding in a coherent, synthesized way the relationship between the sale of your first product and then how it comes back and can provide an opportunity to return, bring that back into your sales cycle. And that introduces this idea of customer 1 versus customer 2 or 3. And how do you bring this together? And as Rich pointed out, there's not a lot of both theoretical information about how this is done. And we just have a few cases of this. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to highlight the strategic importance of this for companies to get this, what Rich calls the circular racetrack, right. Just some key concepts also on reverse logistics is this asset recovery component. It's pretty complicated how you get products back and from various customers. You have to re-aggregate this. You need to find warehouses, and first logistics warehouses don't necessarily align with the needs of recovery. And so these often end up in different physical locations. How you track all the data associated with this is a big issue. And then understanding the history, condition, and how you're going to dispose of this going forward. So that leads you into the operational component, which is a very interesting and complex set of how you sort this stuff. And then how do you position it to resale? And then there's the value proposition of how you create value for the secondary customer. So these are core concepts that we're going to discuss. And then another component is the platforms that are out there that help enable resale. And we're seeing a growing number of these. And the platforms are, big ones like Amazon has a resale platform. Walmart now does as well. eBay, of course, has been in this space for a long time, but we're also seeing a lot of specialty platforms emerge. And the platforms orchestrate these markets. They have their own interests, and their own rules. Some of them are quite strict, and others assume certain risk. Others just leave it up to the parties. So there's a lot of different ways that these platforms operate, but essentially they involve connecting suppliers with buyers, and they may introduce complements like repair or logistics and things of that nature. So platforms have become very important in this space as well. And they range widely. Some are horizontal, i.e. they operate in many different sectors. Some have specialized into specific verticals, like, for example, recreational vehicles, or they may be in furniture. There's interesting platforms now that resell office furniture, for example, and others may be very niche, like focused on one particular product. So cell phones are a good example. There's some interesting dedicated platforms just related to the resale of smartphones. So last slide here, to introduce you to the variation here. Circular is well established in certain markets. Probably the most well established is secondhand vehicles. These have been around for over 25 years. When the internet emerged, platforms quickly emerged for the resale of vehicles. And so that's a well established commercial marketplace. Then on the other end, we have much more difficult markets to establish because the value isn't there. So plastic waste is one example where there's a lot of attention to this problem, but the value proposition is harder to realize. What's exciting is that we're seeing the movement of more and more reverse logistics and platforms in new spaces that were hard in the past, but are becoming more viable, largely because of new business model innovation around platforms, for example, but also new technologies. And we're going to talk about some of the new technologies that are making this more efficient to do these exchanges and bring on and aggregate both buyers and sellers on each side. So with that, what I'd like to do is ask a few questions of our guests today. And I'd like to start with Scott and ask him about an interesting development that happened last year when the National Retail Federation acquired the Reverse Logistics Association. So Scott, what was the thinking behind that acquisition, and what was the strategic goal there?
Yeah, very cool. So for those that don't know on the call, the National Retail Federation is the world's largest trade association for retailers. So we represent some 4.2 million retailers, primarily focused in North America. So that's key. My role is VP of Sustainability. So I am supposed to be helping, I am helping retailers kind of understand the strategic opportunities that exist in the sustainability space. And as we were talking with our members, the world's largest retailers that everybody knows, down to small mom and pops, one of the things that kept popping up was this growing interest in thrifting, in resale, in making sure that once someone bought products, they were properly recycled at end of life. As a consumer, what do I do with this? I can't put it at the curb. So there were lots of kind of interesting questions that retailers were asking. And as we kind of started poking around, I'll confess, Rich, don't make fun of me, but I'll confess, I never really thought a whole lot about the reverse logistics industry. I knew it was something all retailers had to manage, but I never really kind of dug into it. Walmart had been playing in that space for a while, as some of their sustainability work they were doing in 2005 and so was the first time I had ever toured a reverse center. And what was interesting is from that period in 2005 to now, almost 20 years, new technologies had emerged, new consumer drivers have emerged, the economy has shifted, the products have shifted, the kinds of retailers and the rise of e-commerce, all of that has shifted. So all of a sudden, what we at NRF realized is we better learn a little bit more about how this reverse logistics space works. So luckily, Tony, who kind of revitalized the Reverse Logistics Association, he got us introduced to people like Rich and others. And what we really began to see was more and more opportunities. There were a couple of big retailers already hanging out at the Reverse Logistics Association, RLA. And what we realized is NRF had an opportunity to basically acquire a ton of expertise, a ton of content, a very vibrant trade show and conference. It turned out if you wanted to talk reverse logistics, you had to go to the Reverse Logistics Association. And geez, as people who represent retailers, we might have been a little bit jealous of that. So what we realized is if we acquired the Reverse Logistics Association and built it into our Center for Retail Sustainability, we had the opportunity to bring all of these different pieces together. And then you have to remember too that at NRF, sustainability is not the only thing we do. We have meetings for the general counsels, the chief marketing officers, the supply chain people, the merchants. It just goes on and on and on. So what this really did through the acquisition was give the reverse logistics professionals a bigger seat at a growing table. So that's been a big, huge part of it. And it means I get to hang out with you and I get to hang out with Rich, and there's a bunch of other experts in this space. So it's fun to kind of understand the logistics behind it, the software behind it, the demand drivers behind it. And who knew that I would someday walk through a center with Rich, understanding how they are wiping data from televisions so that they can be resold. So it's been fun. But it was a
Super.
strategic decision because reverse and circular logistics are an incredibly essential part of the future of retail.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that context. I don't think people fully knew that story, so appreciate you sharing that. So Rich, you've done a lot of thinking in this area. What do you think are the 4 or 5 desired outcomes of circular? What's the ambition here, the goal, the outcomes that we're looking for?
I'll get into it. But first I'm going to throw some love to Scott, because every person that I met at the Reverse Logistics Association got pulled into reverse from different parts of the business to solve problems. Tony Schroeder from the RLA was at Phillips, and they pulled him out of the field and said, "Hey, we've got a return problem." He's like, "What are you talking about?" And then he saw it. My journey started in retail as a temp from Adecco, taking bill payments for Verizon in a store in Columbia, South Carolina, and I moved through customer service, sales, management. We're in the largest retail district, so half of my life I spent on commission sales within retail. When I got pulled into an operations and marketing director role with a remit to go through and drive market share and also manage cost and operations, driving down unwanted returns was one of my KPIs. There was no one that taught you how to do that. And what pulled me into the space was when I started Verizon's very first retail trade-in program, trying to buy back product from people to put more money in a customer's pocket so they would buy more things in my store. That's why I got into it. And then when I learned that the used mobile devices that you gave $100 for, you could sell for more than that. So used product and the residual value became a better form of payment to drive revenue to the bottom line. And then when we figured out how to leverage platforms and systems to go through and enable equipment to be used as a form of payment, we rolled it out. It was wildly successful. The 2 districts that had the trade-in program were the top districts. And that's what pulled me into reverse logistics when I ran Verizon Center. But in my time, I've learned that there really are 4 desired outcomes, 4 goals of any organization that has or needs circular or reverse logistics. One is to drive sales, like I talked about. One of the very first customer promises that was made was by Montgomery Ward in the 1890s. Mail order catalog salesperson. They would have been a great RLA member or a great NRF member back in the early part of last century. But he made that promise that anyone that bought anything could return it for any reason. And in doing that, you started your foundational problem of returns management and the cost associated with it. The Fords, very first Model Ts that drove off the assembly line, they had a warranty with them. The seats in those cars were made with moss, and the moss had chiggers in it, bugs. So the first automobiles that went off the line had to get recalled to get the bugs taken out of the seats. So now you've got modern promises like free shipping, windows of 15, 30 days, whatever it is, that companies are making to entice customers to buy from them. And you've got your brands and your marketers that are in violent agreement to go through and sell things. One desired outcome, sales enablement, which created the concept of reverse logistics being a necessary evil. What do you do with the stuff that's coming back? How do you drive down unwanted returns? How do you change packaging or instructions, or modern with clothing, putting your face on a virtual model to go through and see what the clothing looks like on you? You want to try to drive down unwanted returns, make things better quality, drive down costs. That's the second desired outcome. That's usually run in a different department or reporting up to a different vice president or C-suite that has a different set of metrics. About 20 plus years ago, you started getting into this concept of green logistics. How do you move things from a point to a point with minimal molestation of the environment? You see that materialized in trying to reduce distance that things travel, reduce energy consumption in facilities, reduce transportation going into electronic versus fuel efficient vehicles, which does go through and reduce harm, but it could also increase cost. And that's against sometimes a traditional cost management desired of managing costs and driving down unwanted returns. Lately, you've been seeing in industries outside of retail and automotive, two of the most successful circular economies that have ever existed, but no one considers circular, this whole desire of circular economy returns, which actually means you want to drive product returns back up. Cisco's CEO at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2018 made a pledge that you could return any customer, or that he wanted to return any customers use Cisco gear from anyone, anywhere at no charge, to go through and minimize harm to the environment. Very bold thing to say, but it drove up cost, drove up returns. When I was running Verizon's monetization team, trying to go through and match used supply with used demand for value that could be applied to driving sales, I wanted to get as many devices as I possibly could because it was a better form of payment that drove revenue to the bottom line. And we introduced a new revenue stream that was in excess of 2% of Verizon's annual value from things that people no longer wanted. So if you look at those four desired outcomes that are usually run by different departments, some complement, some conflict. The barrier to the circular economy is the linear economy and the linear sales programs with the mindset, accounting, procurement, that all returns are bad is one of the biggest obstacles I see people fighting to go through and try to get towards the sustainability goals that they've made by 2030, 2032, that are going to be our problem in a very short amount of time. So we've got to get started.
Yeah. So Scott, you've been hosting a number of workshops over since the beginning of the year. Can you share a little bit about the purpose of that and some of the insights that you've gained from bringing members together around this topic?
Sure. So kind of over the last 18 months or so, excuse me, we have been at NRF very intentionally having conversations around circular economy. So there's lots of different flavors of those conversations, but there's a couple of key reasons. One, this is an industry-wide challenge, an industry-wide opportunity. And part of our role is to help some of the mid-tier and smaller players realize this is an opportunity that the bigger players are busy figuring out. So if we're looking at industry-wide solutions, we need the industry to be paying attention. So that's one of the roles that NRF plays. The other is realizing that retailers, while incredibly important, personally, I think retail is the center of the universe, but we can't do circular economy without the manufacturers, the suppliers, the logistics providers, et cetera. So what we realized is that as an industry, we needed to provide the others who support the industry clarity around the goals, the opportunities, the objectives behind the emerging circular economy. So we've been having lots of different conversations. My personal favorites have been, one was an invitation-only meeting that NRF had held at our big show. So some 40,000 people show up every year in New York City in the cold of January to talk all things retail. And we had a carve-out meeting focused specifically on circular economy. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What does an organization like NRF need to do to support it? We
I
were
was
lucky
there.
enough. I'm sorry, you were there? You were there? Honestly, Rich, I can't remember if you were there. We just talked about it ahead of time. I know Tony, who's on this call, was there. But part of that conversation, we brought Deloitte to the conversation so that they could also hear what we were hearing. We followed up with a survey of NRF members to understand what are you already doing around resale and broader circular economy issues. And we put together a roadmap, the Circular Action Guide, which you can find on nrf.com/sustainability. So nrf.com/sustainability. It really is just kind of a, here's what's happening. Here are the opportunities. Now the conversations are getting even more interesting because if there are 4.2 million retailers in the United States, that means there are 4.2 million different ways of thinking about retail, 4.2 million different ways of thinking about circularity and reverse logistics. So we're busy kind of helping to understand how circular economy looks differently if you're a pure fashion retailer, or you're a pure furniture retailer, or pure electronics or appliance retailer, versus if you're a mass merchant, versus if 99% of your business is e-commerce versus only 10% of your business is e-commerce. So there's all these different flavors and permutations that we're busy playing with. But we've been invited into exciting conversations. We were part of a conversation just last week with the various Goodwill CEOs. So think about that as a long-time piece of the circular economy and where they fit into the conversation. I was working yesterday with the Sleep Products Association. Do not call them the Mattress Association. They are the Sleep Products Association, but literally having conversations around circularity in that product category space. So what we're seeing is these issues are popping up absolutely everywhere. And it's kind of fun to be part of the conversations, particularly knowing that we've got people like Rich and Tony and others who are active participants of the Reverse Logistics Association. So we feel well equipped to tackle some of these issues.
Great. No, that's a great run through. And your point about the variation, there isn't kind of a cookie cutter solution to this, right? That it is diverse. Each sector has its own dynamics, its own different products. And as I showed earlier, some will have very high value, some are very low value. That creates very different kind of approaches that they need to take to drive this. So that's great.
Make a point on what Scott had said with the 4+ million retailers that are there. If you look at the education that is afforded, finance, business management, your supply chain degrees, I've only found 2 colleges on the planet right now that have a course on reverse logistics. So without these experts in the field going through and helping standardize the processes, you go through, you look at systems, SAP, Oracle, everyone's procurement process is the same. New condition, cost of goods, a depreciation schedule. People are trained how to go through and do that. Your forward contracts are also written in a more standardized approach. Payment terms net 30, net 60, net 120, whatever it is. You've got standardization on a procurement of product 1 when it's being sold to customer 1, and massive amounts of institutional knowledge to back it up.
was exactly my question, which is what is the difference between linear sales and circular sales? Most people don't think about circular sales or reverse logistics sales, and that you may need like a dedicated team on that to help facilitate it.
So your linear sales model, make, use, dispose, selling to customer one with linear returns being going from the customer back to the source. The concept of customer one is what most companies get in the business to make. I'm going to make this cup. I'm going to figure out how to manufacture it. I'm going to figure out how to sell it. I'm going to figure out how to ship it and get it to the customer. And if they return it, a lot of companies are just writing off the value as a percentage of business and write it off as a cost. But when you go through and you're selling to customer one, you've got people that are trained how to go through and source the parts for the cup, the plastics, the metals. How do you go through and arrange for it to all be assembled, packaged, shipped in neat condition to the place where there's very few discrepancies. I like to think of the easiest way to explain this is looking at a car dealership. You've got a new car lot and you've got a used car lot. Your new car lot will have things brought in from the manufacturer in one condition that are forecasted based upon a sales model. I want this many green ones. I want this many black ones, this many white ones, this many trucks, this many cars. And I want them to arrive at this time, and you can predict to a high degree what's coming in. That is how most industries have been trained, selling product one to customer one. But if you look at the car dealerships, home, your real estate, you've got used supply that you want to get. If you're wanting to grow your used car sales, you need more cars. You can either get more cars by giving people value for money as they're going from their old car to the next new car. But when that used car drives on the lot, you don't know what color it's going to be. You don't know how many miles are on it. You don't know what condition it's going to be until it gets there. And your used procurement needs to be different than new procurement, because you've got to be able to go through and offer a compelling price that would make a customer want to turn that product back into you. Then you've got to be able to assess cosmetic and functional to see what it looks like. How does it function? So you know, should I invest a few more dollars in changing the tires to improve the value? And then how you sell that product is also different. You might be able to go through and put it on your used car lot. But if the lot is full or it doesn't match your expectations of what your customers would want, then you need to go through and have maybe smaller car lots around, different distributors, different people that will sell product in different parts of the world. So your value generation channel for used to get to customer 2, customer 3, customer 4 may not be, and is often not, the same organizational setup that you have to sell to customer 1. So as this market's continuing to grow, your circular movement going from the manufacturer to the customer through forward logistics, giving a compelling return reason to get that product back from the customer, to go through and assess the cosmetic and functional value to get it to whatever the customer 2 wants. They don't necessarily want new. They don't necessarily want a new warranty. They don't necessarily want used or new services. If you look at a car dealership, there's used car warranties, there's used car finances. The same thing goes with home. And you're seeing, outside of brand and retailer involvement, different circular platforms. And Peter, you're one of the best in the planet at identifying those that are matching used supply with used demand without the involvement of the manufacturers, and the value is exploding up. So it's starting to get big enough to where you're seeing retailers and brands try to go through and harness this, because you're not going to beat the secondary market. You're not going to kill it. Government's not going to let you kill it with regulations. There's an epiphany and a light bulb going off that the way to go through and handle the circular economy is to be the best at it. You're seeing it in mobility. You're starting to see it in computing. HP is doing some cool stuff with their renewed program. But this problem is not going away. this problem is an opportunity for those that really want to invest and take advantage of it.
Hey, Peter, before
Great.
we turn it to you to talk software, I want to just pivot off of something Rich said to kind of clarify something for those in the audience. I am the VP for sustainability at the National Retail Federation. I came to this space from a sustainability perspective.
Right.
That is not where the business value is popping, right? So if we look at, new and used automobiles, it wasn't that someone said, we have a sustainability challenge, we should start selling used automobiles. That was not it. This was a business opportunity. And that is what is really driving the circular economy, the circular logistics space, is there is actually money involved. So when we talk about circularity, one of the things to kind of keep in mind is that the money is leading a lot of this activity, and the sustainability benefits, the environmental benefits are kind of a free add-on to that business model. So, and Peter, I know you've got some kind of software connections you want to kind of help us all make, but this is a business conversation, not just some sort of tree hugging hippie freak conversation.
Let me validate that with a couple points. Kelley Blue Book was started by an automotive dealership in California in 1918 that started selling Model T Fords. And then when people had cars that they didn't want, and he had people driving on the lot, coming up to their lot that couldn't afford a new car, he very quickly started saying, well, hey, I can buy this at this price and sell it at that price. And that price will help me sell the next model of cars to encourage early adoption. And then after he had enough people come on the lot, he had a published list of what a profitable buy price was and a profitable sell price was, and he started publishing it. It's where the Kelley Blue Book came from, and it got automated online in 1995. I started Verizon's very first trade-in program in 2011 when we launched the iPhone 4S, knowing that those devices were going to hold value. And I wanted to be able to give customers value when they were buying the next thing, because I knew I could get that money back. There was a lot of pressure from the suppliers that we had to kill that program because they feared the cannibalization of revenue from the sale of used devices. They thought that every used device sale displaced a new product sale, which isn't true. If I go through and trade in my 2015 Dodge Ram, someone's going to buy it for more than I traded in. And if I use that to buy the next new car, there's two different customers with two different goals of buying vehicles. In 2019, January 3rd, I believe is what it was, Tim Cook wrote a letter to his investors after a soft fourth quarter, stating that his plan to go through and right-size revenue was to make it easy for customers to trade in their old product, because that used product acted as a subsidy towards the next new purchase. It was better for the environment, and it grew their install base. Every used Apple device, Apple knows about, because customer 2, 3, or 4 have to register who they are and their payment information. So these devices are ATM machines for Apple. When they started seeing revenue fire up in places that they weren't selling to customer 1, the light bulb was going off that there is a market. And when there was enough light bulbs that went off in that place, then they knew where to go through and deploy their resources, because it was a hot market for customer 1. And when you build an ecosystem for customer 2, 3, or 4 that has value, you can use that value to help you sell more things.
Yeah. So, Scott, to your point, I totally agree on the business value. What I think is interesting and would like to get your thoughts on is that value proposition is changing partly due to new technology innovation and digitization, right? So I think people have this idea of what the reverse logistics is going to cost and the what's available to them to actually make that happen, that is fixed like a decade ago. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what you see changing that is helping to reduce the friction of the transaction costs associated with exchange And that has to do partly with the rise of platforms that now allow for this. I was really interested to see this technology that Goodwill is now adopting, using computer vision. In the past, when they got an item, they gave it to a person who looked at it, wrote a description, and then they posted that online. That now can be automated. And so Goodwill can now process a lot more material. So I'm just interested in your thoughts and what you've seen in terms of technology innovation that is actually changing the fundamental business proposition to actually make that value capture actually even more possible than it was in the past.
I love it, Peter. Your question has the answer embedded in it. So I'll call out the answer and then give a few examples. But the answer is the opportunity has always been there, but it's been difficult to implement because of various friction points in the process. And what advanced technology is doing is eliminating or eroding those, reducing those friction points. So think through different aspects of the circular economy from the retailer's perspective. So the retailers have a variety of challenges. They have excess inventory. This is stuff that didn't sell. We need to move it out of our warehouse. Where are we going to sell it? How do we maximize the value? Can I recycle it? Can I sell it? What are the opportunities? So just information cost is one aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So managing that. So that's excess inventory. Look at goods that have been returned by the consumer. This doesn't fit. I didn't like the color. Whatever those opportunities. That's a different kind of challenge because it's not all one kind of product. Now you've got all these like bits and pieces of different things. That's a different technology, a different challenge that can be addressed by different technologies to help sort, which is where the value is, sort the products into resellable, not resellable, into recyclable, not recyclable, and then figure out what the markets are. So again, technology is reducing all of that friction, which is a fancy way of saying lowering costs, which is a benefit. All right. Then you've got other aspects because of regulatory pressures. Retailers and manufacturers are more and more being expected to understand what happens to products once they've sold them and the consumer no longer wants it, right? Don't throw this away. There's all sorts of precious metals in there and you don't want it in a landfill. So all of a sudden, that's a new piece. How do we figure out where these goods, whether it's an appliance, a mattress, certain kinds of fashion items, where is it going next after consumer one? So again, the opportunity is technology reduces the friction in those pieces. You use Goodwill as an example. So now something has ended up in a donation bin. There are actually people that want to know, hey, what's there? If you are a luxury brand product, you might want access into what's being donated to Goodwill just to understand what percentage of fake bags are being returned. Like you have insights that are valuable insights that one can use to make better strategic business decisions. So again, that's the kind of stuff that would always be interesting. It was just gosh darn too hard and difficult to get to it, so you didn't bother. Technology has made that easier. Look at Goodwill and the way they can generate revenue. So products have been donated. Now I've got great big bales. Let's just look at clothing, for example. The value in any recyclable, anything Goodwill couldn't sell, they want to recycle, right? But the value of the ability to generate value in recycling spaces is to separate it into materials. What's cotton? What's wool? What's a blend? What's, polyesters? So you start realizing that some of these advanced vision technologies or infrared technologies can sort products into different piles, right? Because by doing that sorting, you have increased the value. People will pay more for a bale of just blue jeans or just cotton or just polyester than they would pay for a bale that blended all of them. So again, technology, both in the vision, the technology communicating, identifying different markets, all of that's reducing friction, increasing value, increasing revenue, lowering costs.
Yeah, and I've been looking recently at what I call the rise of RaaS, which is resale as a service. What's also interesting and exciting is that companies now don't have to do this on their own. There are third parties that are now introducing really interesting turnkey solutions that now the brands can turn to, and the platforms are enabling resale and actually trying to attract business for resale. And so you're seeing this convergence. And also, big data was trained on the linear economy for a long time. What's really interesting is to see the growth and the density of the data now that's increasingly available, and how that can drive better business decisions. So
I'll tell you one of the challenges, Peter. Just the challenge is a lot of retailers don't have the resources to understand all the different pieces of the technology. It's like we've got this box of Legos lying around, and no one's quite sure how to stack those Legos together to solve one retailer's specific needs. So we need kind of a circularity tech stack.
Yeah, well, it also has to be laddered up to strategy. This needs to be embedded in corporate strategy. And so they need a reverse logistics or a circular economy strategy. And all the pieces that you're talking about have to be figured out, and what capabilities they need to build in-house, and then what can they outsource. What I was just pointing out is that there's actually more interesting third parties out there than probably a lot of companies realize that can enable this in pretty interesting. I've actually seen recently a number of recruiters now advertising and creating job boards specifically around circular, because so many companies are now embedding this in their job descriptions. So this is becoming a profession, right?
There's actually there's a young lady, Palumi, that's on this call right now. I see her in the participant. She reached out to me on LinkedIn, trying to go through. She's got a master's degree and a sense of purpose to go through, and she's seeking jobs in the circular space because she believes in the value. So she's hunting for this. And by the way, when I was at Cisco and I was at Verizon, I was looking at employee opinion surveys over a 25-year career. The reasons why an employee chose a company changed from the top desired outcome of job applicants being salary and stability to a sense of purpose. Gen Z and millennials are motivated by different things, and the people in power at companies right now. eBay did a study, 80% of Gen Z and 78% of millennials bought something used last year. The ThreadUp did a study that the used clothing market is growing 3 times faster than the new clothing market, with over 40% of people checking the resale value of their clothing before they buy it, because they know they can leverage technology to sell it. And they might be able to buy a nicer thing if they know how to go through and extract the value for the thing once they've worn it.
And people check the resale value of cars before they buy it. So I just think that the technology is now moving so that other products that weren't kind of in that category are now being exposed. Let me ask Scott one more question before we turn to questions. I'm sure that you closely monitor the policy landscape. Interested in your perspective on what you see on the horizon. Are we seeing kind of a plateauing, or do you see an increasing attention to this? Not only on regulations to constrain business, but also, I've seen EPA and the Department of Energy actually now issue grants for innovation in this space. And there's also growing attention to critical materials. So this isn't just a, environmental, it's also national security. And if you have, what did you say, 4.2 million retailers out there, they have access to a lot of strategic materials. So I'm just kind of interested in where you see the policy landscape going over the next year and beyond.
So there's a lot of fun policy stuff happening in Europe around extended producer responsibility. You can also see things like in France, they have banned the export of textile waste. So they're saying this is an issue you can't just send it to some foreign country to deal with. The state of Massachusetts here in the United States has established a ban on textiles going to landfills, again, saying you've got to deal with these kinds of issues. But extended producer responsibility language is basically pushing manufacturers, producers, which sometimes includes retailers, into taking ownership of any adverse impacts of the disposal of that product. So one of the opportunities in the space is around eco-modulation, which is basically fancy language
Fancy
saying,
word. Eco-modulation,
if,
okay.
if you can prove to us that it's not ending up in a landfill, right? It's being resold, it's being properly recycled, etc. Then you actually have the ability to pay lower fees as a result. So these kinds of things are popping, and they are popping in very sporadic places. I mean, California, New York, Washington State are kind of the givens, but you will see EPR legislation focusing on electronics, or in some places, or mattresses in other places, or used oil, which has been around forever, and electronics in some places. So for the big global or national retailers, the challenge is it's kind of almost a whack-a-mole, and are responding to all these different issues that are popping up, which goes back to some of the conversation we've been having here, right? If there are business-driven reasons, right, in the circular economy, reselling products, renting products, refilling products, you've created whole business models that are an alternative way of addressing those environmental challenges that the laws are trying to address.
So it's a way to get ahead of something that's inevitable from a regulatory standpoint.
Whether it's inevitable or not, people are making money at it. And there's kind of the added benefit of also complying with legislation that appears to be headed this way.
So do you think that there's competitive advantage in building a strong, effective circular reverse logistics strategy for firms?
I think it absolutely would be the answer. I think that looking at it from a purely strategic perspective, the question is, what's coming? Am I going to be affected by it? Is it going to be something that's required for me? But the important piece is, how long does it take me to build the solution? And so that's the piece that people need to really focus on, because there are not yet turnkey solutions. And we saw this as a problem when the pandemic hit. And there were a bunch of retailers who did not have e-commerce platforms, or did not have robust e-commerce platforms. And then when a black swan event hits, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, and they're trying to build something quickly overnight. And that created a lot of problems, including the returns problem that we're seeing.
Well,
So
you're seeing
part of
some
it is like,
solutions.
know what's coming, plan for it, budget for it.
Yeah, and there are some solutions that are coming out right now. In Europe with the GDPR rules that are requiring the makers of things to begin accounting and paying for the disposal when it goes into a landfill, begs the question, well, how do you know when things go into a landfill? How do you go through and assign that charge? Which is created this concept called the digital passport, which is coming up. How do you serialize a non-serialized thing like a cup with a unique identifier that you can track and trace? What were the materials that were used to make it? If circular platforms and marketplaces require a digital passport in order for it to be sold, then you start getting things that can prove that a product went from one customer to the next. And when those transactions take place, then you start accounting for what was the value that was given when someone bought the used thing.
Right.
Just like in the automotive industry.
Yeah. Well, another demand source is some countries are imposing regulations that require new products to have a certain percentage recycled material in the new product. So suddenly now it's valuable to collect those materials and make them available for new production. So lots of interesting dynamics in this space. So Tom Gatos, are there any questions that have come in while we've been having this great dynamic chat?
Absolutely. We've got just doing a time check. We've got about 6 minutes left before the top of the hour here. So, hey, if you guys can stay on and go over, that's cool. And just a reminder to everybody on the line that you will be getting the full recording of this. So if people can't hang out and have meetings or something, you will get the full benefit of the Q&A if we do run over. So yes, we do have a couple great questions. There's one from Erin here that I think I'm going to put to the front of the list here because I think it dovetails nicely off of the conversation you were just having about digital passports and just various types of businesses getting involved with this. And her question is, can you share any successful case studies or examples where B2B companies specifically have turned their returns into a profitable or value-adding operation through these circular logistics strategies?
So
Yeah,
Rich, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. So from a B2B perspective, I ran Cisco's global reverse logistics operation. So I got to run a plant in the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Japan, US, 12 places to help me shepherd product across borders. We won 3 Gartner supply chain awards the 3 years I was there, partly due to changes that we made in circularity. One of the biggest elements that I was able to use to take Cisco's reverse logistics from a cost center, costing the company resources to run, to a profit center, creating more benefit to the organization than the cost to use. A simple one was a program that we had. It was a legacy return reason that if ever something left the facility and the minute it was shipped, it went from new to used. The product was getting sent back if it was undelivered for whatever reason to Cisco's headquarters in San Jose, California, because they put the company address on the invoice. So when things were rejected, they went to the company address and it was written down and it was kept there. So first thing I had to do is get the product sent to our return center. And then I could take a look at that, and I had to go through and change the rules because it wasn't used stuff. It was still new. And you're talking millions of dollars of revenue that could be generated. We could test it. We could forensically go through and make sure that it was never activated. And then we had to just set up rules to say this product could be reused as new because it's never been touched. It still meets the customer commitments. And by going through and changing some of the legacy linear rules that no one had looked at for years, as well as building products like product as a service, where you go through and sell a product and cycle it through more than once. There's many entities right now that are going through and generating value from a B2B standpoint. Great question.
Excellent, excellent. And I think unfortunately we're going to have to cap it there. The other, we do have some very good questions, and we'll try and follow up with individuals as well that are asking these questions, but nothing that's going to last only 3 minutes. So I think we can
big questions.
I'll turn it back over to Peter to wrap up.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Rich and Scott. Very insightful, both on your business background and experience you've had, Rich, and then Scott helping us understand really the exciting drivers that are getting the NRF to really focus in on this. Just to close, are there any interesting meetings or things coming up in the next 6 to 8 months that people should be aware of?
I will say there's a couple of things. So the Reverse Logistics Association has its RLA Leadership Summit. I think it's next week, right, Rich, or the week after?
September.
Next, yeah.
That's coming up, which is absolutely important. The NRF Big Show is again going to focus on circularity in a number of different parts. So there's a Supply Chain 360 event that'll touch on reverse logistics and circularity. There's also a circularity focused conversation that we'll be having again in collaboration with our friends at Deloitte. And if you hit nrf.com/sustainability, you'll see a bunch of other kind of interesting and exciting opportunities. Rich?
Yeah, one thing that's real important that I want to make sure that people know. I believe that today is Scot Case's birthday. So if LinkedIn and text message universe can let Scott know to have a happy birthday, you only turned 27.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you,
That's
Rich.
fantastic. Happy birthday. I did not know that. So thanks, Rich, for letting us know.
No better way to spend it.
Yes, great. And then Rich, where can people find your book?
If you go to Amazon, it's there. There's a Shopify link that I have. If you search Going Circular Shopify or Going Circular Rich Bulger, it'll come up. If you're a member of the Reverse Logistics Association, I gave the book to them for free. So if you're a member of the RLA, you can download a version of the ebook for free, or shoot me a message if you want to talk about it. I actually had another college yesterday reach out saying that they want to build a reverse logistics curriculum, and
Nice.
wanted to know if my book could be used to do that. Absolutely.
Yes.
And the follow-up
great.
we send will include all links to all of these resources as well. So anybody on the line, anybody that registered will also get direct links to all of these wonderful resources.
Great. Well, here at McFadyen, we're working on a database of all the circular marketplaces in the world, and there are more than you may imagine. It's extremely interesting, and I've been looking at this space. I see technology enablers, I see policy enablers, but also the marketplaces out there are building this capability, and it's reducing the friction and improving the facility and allowing for embedded services like insurance, like logistics, like data analytics that are going to further this. So as you can tell, I'm pretty bullish on this. I see this as a mega trend. And it's fantastic to meet thought leaders in this space. So I appreciate you guys coming on today. So with that, we'll wrap things up.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Look for the follow-up, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.